Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online build video with me, Sherman. Today we're going to be taking a look at Meridia's Hand. This is the Templar Stamina DPS build. It is a little different than most of the other builds I've released this time around. That's because it is using a two-handed weapon along with a bow. So remember, these builds are to help you get into in-game. So the builds I'm releasing right now, this build is to help you get there, and with some adjustments you can play it in the in-game trials and stuff like that, and I'll explain that at the end of the video. So I'll show you guys how to set them up for real in-game play. So that's it. Let's get right into the build. So taking a look at the stats, you will see we have 11,000 magicka, 17k health, 31k stamina. The stamina is not too high, but don't worry about it because you are a Khajiit. You get a little bit better critical than most other races, and this build has a ton of weapon damage to compensate for the lack of. So as you can see right out the door, 3,493 weapon damage with a 45% crit, and that is not buffed up. We are sitting at 4,000 weapon damage with a 55% weapon critical. We have 14k spell resistance with a 12k physical resistance. We are running the Warrior Mundus Stone, and we are running Dubious Cameron Throne for the max stamina, max health, and some stamina recovery. I'm going to tell you guys, this build can get a lot more weapon damage than this. After you have Spell Power Cure, if you have somebody running Powerful Assault, and then on top of that, if you have the weapon damage glyph, this build can go almost to 6,000 weapon damage, which is crazy. So let's go ahead and take a look at the gear. So the sets we're running is Krogs. The reason we're running Krogs is the extra penetration that it offers, and on top of that, when you deal damage, you have a 10% chance of dealing extra damage. And this can proc every 3 seconds, and trust me, this build procs it like crazy. The bigger pieces on this build are running tri-stat glyphs, so the helm, the chest, and the legs are running tri-stat. The shoulders and the smaller pieces are all running stamina glyphs. And if you, like I said, I'll tell you how to change it to make this more in-game, more veteran trial related when we get there. So besides Krogs, the other set we are running is 5 pieces of Hunting's Rage. Everyone should have guessed that. It's mainly for the weapon critical and the weapon damage. This build doesn't have a lot of penetration, like physical pen, like the other builds that run Night Mothers. The reason why I don't run Night Mothers is it does not work with Night Mothers. So I've already tried. Greater stamina, greater weapon damage, that's what Hunting's allows. 2 things of crit, 1 stamina, and then 1 5-piece bonus of extra weapon damage. The final set we are running down here is a 3-piece agility set. The reason we're running 3-piece agility is because it does give you a lot of extra stamina, extra weapon damage. You're not going to be able to get it in gold on the live game that I know of. You can only get it in purple, but don't worry, it still works. We're running 2 weapon damage, 1 stamina recovery on the agility, and then moving down to the weapons. These are both crafted weapons. These are not dropped like Maelstrom Master weapons, but I will explain that when we get to the end of the video. So we are running an infused two-handed with a Crusher enchant. You can put a different enchant on here if somebody else is running Crusher, so you can put like a damaging enchant like Poison or Disease on here if you want. And then on the back bar, always run an infused bow with weapon damage. Now you can change this to Nirnhoned if if somebody else is running Crusher. You can change this to Nirnhoned and run a like Poison enchant on it, and it works out really well. In fact, it boosts your damage by a whole lot. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. And then, of course, like I said, the weapon damage. There is a reason why I chose two-handed over sword and or dual wield for this, guys. And the main reason why is because of how the Templar works. And we'll get into that when we get into the skills. But always try to run a Crusher or run Nernhone with like a poison disease here, and then that on the back bar. So let's go ahead and take a look at the skills. Also, if you guys are wondering, this is a 5-1-1 setup. The chest is heavy, the legs are medium, and everything else is yeah. So, or the chest is heavy, the belt is light, everything else is medium going around. So it's really easy to put together. Heavy chest, light legs, or light belt, and then everything else medium. And divines. So, and like I said, on the 3 big pieces, just make sure you have tri-stats, and then on the smaller ones, just run stamina. And even if you are running dual stat food, by the way, you can see here, you do go up to 19k health with 33k stamina, but I'll show you guys in the final thing on how you can adjust this to get greater stuff. So, alright, so going in and taking a look at the skills. Always make sure you get your class passives, especially for this build. And one of the class passives you definitely need for this build is Balanced Warrior, Burning Light, and Piercing Spear. These are super essential to this build. The Nightblade is one of the only classes that gets 10% critical damage without slotting the trap beast, but we also have that as well. So we actually end up with like a 40% critical damage bonus, so it's pretty crazy. Down here we are running Burning Light, or we do have the Burning Light passive, so anytime we use our Biting Jabs, we have a 25% chance to deal 5,020 extra damage. And then down here we have Balanced Warrior, which increases our weapon damage by 6%. It's not 6% of something, it's literally 6%. So our weapon damage is actually really high for this, because two-handed, if you guys didn't know, if you take dual wield and two-handed and put them side by side, two-handed actually has more damage overall than dual wield. Dual wield just has more faster light attacks and heavy attacks than the two-handed. So, but always make sure you get your class passives, even if you're not using all your class abilities. Make sure you still get the passives, because they can still help you out later down the road. Two-handed, make sure you get all the passives. Bow, all the passives. You want to have them maxed out. Light armor, the top 3, because we are wearing a 5-1-1 setup. Medium armor, you want all the passives again. And then with heavy armor, you want the top 3. So this gives you the greater amount of return versus what you have. Moving on to world skills, this build does work with a werewolf really well, but also works really good with a vampire as well, if you want to run either one of those. You can run both in the soul things there. And then on the Fighters Guild, make sure you get all the Fighters Guild passives. On Mages Guild, you only need the top one. Undaunted, get both the passives for Undaunted. Make sure you get this as quickly as you can, especially if you're going to start doing trials. This will really help you out. Moving into Assault, you do need these 2 passives for this build to work really good. And if you don't stress it. There is other things you can use in their stead. So, Khajiit, make sure you get all the passives, especially this one. You want that 8% increased critical. And moving on to the crafts, medicinal use and provisionings, Gorman and Chronosaur. You need these, especially for when you switch over to using the dual stat food that gives you greater food, like health and stamina. You want that there, because it's 1 hour lengthened food. Alrighty, now that we've done that, let's go ahead and take a look at the skills we have on our bar. On the main bar, we are running Carve. Carve gives us a really good physical damage up front and bleed over time, but it applies to multiple targets. So it can hit a total of 6 targets in a 7-meter cone in front of you. So it can do a lot of damage. It also gives you ultimate generation, which is great for this build. You'll be able to fire off Dawnbreaker pretty quick. And Dawnbreaker is your main ultimate for this build. Next up is Biting Jabs. This is you're not going to spam this, okay? You will not spam this. You'll be firing this off in a rotation. So just use it like you would in any rotation. You're going to fire this off, and then you're going to move to the next ability, so on and so forth. On the front bar, though, you will be doing a heavy attack rotation, and I'll show you when we go to do the parse on the skeleton. Next up is Wrecking Blow. This does an immense amount of damage, and it also grants you Empower for 5 seconds, increasing the damage of your next attack by 20%. Now, depending on when the health of the enemy is, it will always be Executioner Strike. So when you get to that point where Executioner Strike is actually taking effect, it will be increased by another 20% in damage. And then lastly, we have Resolving Vigor. This is a great heal, but if you don't have this, go ahead and run Restoring Life. Go ahead and grab Honor the Dead, or run Breath of Life. I prefer Honor the Dead, to be honest, with this build, and put it right here where Resolving Vigor is. Moving on to the last ability, we have Flawless Dawnbreaker. This increases our weapon damage by another 5%. Now, we are using Power Pots, and Power Pots give us weapon damage, weapon critical, and increased stamina recovery. So you kind of need all three of those. Now look how much damage this Dawnbreaker does, and then watch this real quick. And this isn't even maxing out our weapon damage. So when this is completely maxed out, the damage this can do is 15k on the damage over time, and then up front it can do 14,000 or something. I know, I've already tested. And that's with 6,000, almost 6,000 weapon damage. So, all right, moving to the back bar, we have Rearming Trap. This is a great ability for this because it grants you Minor Force, increasing your critical damage done by 10%. And you are running an Adric Spear ability back here too, because if you do not run an Adric Spear ability on both bars, you do not gain this benefit of increased critical damage done and your damage against blocking targets by 10% while you have an Adric Spear ability slotted. And this ability you won't use unless you're in the open world and you just want to just kind of just use it, then you can. But most of the time you will never use this. Alright, so Rearming Trap, really good. Gives you Minor Force. This will have Minor Force on there, basically another version of Minor Force. So you get really powerful critical damage with this build. Moving on, we also have Poison Injection. This increases or does poison damage up front and does damage over time, and it does increased damage to enemies below 50% health. So it gets more powerful the lower their health gets. Next up, we have Endless Hail. This is just an AoE damage area of effect, really good for this build. And then next up, we have Razor Caltrops. If you don't have Razor Caltrops, go into Undaunted and grab Trapping Webs. If you don't have Razor Caltrops. And also, if you don't have either one of those, you can also grab like Silver Bolts or something if you want to put in its stead. But just remember that you have other options if you don't have this. But this is going to be your best option. Really good AoE, really good CC, and then on top of that, does really good damage. So it's just really good to have. And then last but not least, we have Power of the Light. Now the reason we're using Power of the Light is we can stack damage, not only for ourselves, but for our group. And it also applies Minor Fracture and Minor Breach, which reduces both physical and spell resistance of the enemy by 1320. Now remember, this build doesn't have a lot of extra pen, but you take this and Krogs together, and then you apply the Crusher enchant, and you have just over 5k penetration with this, just like that. So you don't really need much, else to build on. Like if somebody has hunting, or not huntings, but if somebody else is running Night Mothers and another person is running Sunder Flame, you're almost at the penetration cap. As soon as somebody applies Alkosh, boom, you're done. You're there. And then the tank's 5k from Pierce Armor. That'll put you at 10,000. This build's really OP though. And then last but not least is Crescent Sweep. Now this does physical damage in an arc in front of you to all nearby enemies, and an additional 4,000 damage every 2 seconds for 6 seconds. Enemies in the front of you take 66% and more damage. So this is a really powerful ability, but you're not going to be using it too often. Alrighty, so that's the skills. Now let's go take a look at the champion points. So going over the champion points here, very similar to my other stamina DPS builds. 56 in an ironclad. This reduces direct damage taken by 20%. We have 3 in a medium armor focus. This gives us a little bit of extra physical resistance. As you guys can see, it puts us just over 12k. And if you do the math and actually break this down, you'll see that we actually gain, because of that 300, we actually gain another point in mitigation. So it's just a little bit extra and pretty nice. So moving on, we have 56 in thick skin. This reduces damage taken from damage over time effects by 20%. Then we have 43 into hardy, reducing damage taken from physical poison and disease damage by 10%. And then elemental defender, which reduces damage taken from flame, frost, shock, and magic damage by 10%. These two here do not stack together, but they do stack with these. So thick skin stacks with hardy, thick skin stacks with elemental defender, and ironclad stacks with both of them separately. So it's really good to have a good spread of points here. Moving on to the final tree here, we have 16 in expert defender. This reduces damage taken from light and heavy attacks by 10%. And if you guys didn't know, 60% of most enemies' attacks are going to be light or heavy attacks. So, and then going down here, we have 23 in a quick recovery. The reason we have 23 in a quick recovery is a lot of classes don't have healing received unless you're a DK. And then on top of that, a lot of DPS gear doesn't offer a lot of healing received. So this gives you a way of boosting your healing received, which makes you have greater survivability from heals. So it's good to have. It's really good to have, in fact. 6% is almost perfect, by the way. Moving on, we have 23 into Warlord. This reduces the cost to break free by 10%. We have 20 into Sprinter. This reduces our sprint cost by 12%. And then 75 into Mooncalf, increasing our stamina recovery by 14%. The Templar doesn't get any base stamina or magic recovery unless they equip a skill called Repentance. Now, Repentance is another one you can slot on your character, but honestly, it's really just almost not worth it, because you already have enough recovery, stamina recovery. You don't need any extra. So it's a nice heal too, but unless enemies are dead, it's kind of useless. That's why I like Breath of Life or Honor the Dead better. But this does help, especially if you're playing a Khajiit or a Red Guard or even a High Elf. You get a lot of stamina recovery because of those races. Next up, we have 43 into Tenacity. This will increase your stamina return for your fully charged heavy attacks because you are using stamina weapons by 10%. Your base heavy attack return is 30%. This adds another 10%, making it 40%. With the higher stamina recovery, you get more stamina back when you do your heavy attacks. Moving on down here, we have 56 in the Tumbling. This reduces dodge roll by 20%. Really important for DPS to be able to have mobility in combat, and dodge rolling is your main mobility for mitigating damage. So that's why we have this here. And then 23 into Shadow Word, reducing your block cost by 10%. They just recently reduced the block cost from 2170 or something like that to 1730. So almost 400 or over 400 points off the block cost. This will save you a smaller amount, but it still saves you resources. So you're not expending extra resources when you do need to block. Alright, moving on to the middle tree here. We have 35 in a physical weapon expert, increasing your light and heavy attacks done with one-handed weapons, one-handed shield, dual-wield bow, and two-handed by 20%. So, this is great for this build because you do a lot of heavy attacks. If you guys didn't know, two-handed has a lot of cleave to it because of one of their passives. So two-handed has a passive called Forceful, which your light and heavy attacks damage up to 3 other nearby enemies for 66% of the damage inflicted to the primary target. This is really good when you boost up that light and heavy attack damage. So that's why we have that boosted. On top of that, we have 51 in a Master at Arms. All light and heavy attacks done with this build are direct damage. So even the two-handed, even though it hits other targets, whatever target you're aiming at is going to take that direct damage. So it's boosted by another 19%, which makes it a total of 39% direct damage. So, and then a lot of your abilities are direct damage as well. So try to remember that. Moving on to over here, we have 43 into Mighty, increasing our physical, poison, disease damage done by 10%. We do have 4 into Piercing. This increases physical penetration by 413. Precise strikes by 56, or we have 56 in here, increasing your critical damage and critical healing done with your stamina abilities by 20%. We are running a stamina heal, so getting that greater critical chance to heal with is a lot better. Remember this also. So forceful or minor force, and that thing we get from our champion, or from Adric Spear slotted, that extra 10% critical damage, both of those stack with this. Rearming Trap and this stack together. And Major Force from Warhorn stacks with this. The Templar is the only one who gains this much critical benefit. Critical damage benefit. That's why this build works so well with a Khajiit. Your critical damage is boosted by a base of 50%. This adds 20 to it, so that's 70. Then you add the Adric Spear one, that's another 10, that's 80, and then Rearming Trap, that's 90. Now you add Major Force, which adds 15% for 8 seconds through Warhorn. That's 105% critical damage. No other class can do it. So it really helps out. Next, we have 51 into Thaumaturge, and this is mainly for Carve and Poison Injection and Dawnbreaker. That's it. You don't need it any higher. 19 points is really good. It increases the damage you do with damage over time effects by 19%. So it works out really good, because not only is your light and heavy attacks and your direct damage is being boosted by 19%, but your damage over time is being boosted by 19%. But your heavy attacks are being boosted by 39, 49% extra damage. And you got to remember, this thing can get up to 6k weapon damage. Then you add this to it, that's a lot of weapon damage. Or a lot of damage this thing can do. So that's why I chose the two-handed with this build, is because it just can damage so much more. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys a quick parse with this. I'm going to do 2 different parses. I'm going to show you the rotation first, then I'm going to do a full parse and kill the skeleton, and then afterwards I'm going to show you guys how you can set this up for like vet playstyle. So the first thing you want to make sure you do is always make sure you have your potion going first before you start. And then the one thing you're going to start with is you're going to start with this trap, light attack, poison injection, light attack, endless hail, light attack, and then you're going to drop caltrops, and then light attack again after caltrops, swap bars, do carve, heavy attack, biting jabs, and after biting jabs, heavy attack, and then wrecking blow, heavy attack, and then do this, reverse slice, and then do a light attack, and then swap bars, and do the whole process over again. And then when your ultimate is up, whatever ultimate you have up, always use it on the front bar and use Dawnbreaker. And that's because of the greater damage. Now I'm going to wait for the potion to reset, and I will go ahead and show you guys the full parse on this at a decent speed that I can do. So I can't promise you miracles. And I screwed up on there. And I messed up that one too. And I'm going to go ahead and Dawnbreaker now. And as you saw that I did Dawnbreaker, and I did a double version of that one thing there. would you fire that stupid ability off? And there we go. So there's that, and as you guys can see, we did 16,000, but if you have full, like all full penetration, all that kind of stuff up in there and running, you actually boost your damage by a lot more. And like I said, when you're playing in a group where somebody already has Crusher, you don't need it. You can actually swap it out, that weapon out, to a two-handed Nirnhoned with a poison enchant, which is going to increase your damage overall to a greater amount. And on top of that, you'll get a lot more DPS out of the build. So it's kind of a little more effective that way. Now again, it's up to you on how you choose to play the build and what you want to do with the build, but that right there, this setup is the best I found for this particular thing. And you can use other races. You can use Redguard, you can use Wood Elf, you can use, you know, Argonian if you want. You could even use High Elf if you want. But it's really up to you on what you choose to play, and I just decided that this would be best for this. So now how do you set this up for a really good trial build, right? So there is two things you can do. One, you can change this out to a 3-piece what is that set? Vicious Serpent set, or Vicious Ophidian as a lot of people like to call it. You can switch this out to that with a Vicious Ophidian two-handed Nirnhoned with the poison enchant, and then on the back bar run a Maelstrom bow. That will increase your overall DPS by a really like large amount, because Vicious Serpent, the 2-piece is going to give you extra critical, the 3-piece is going to give you extra penetration, or not extra damage against dungeon monsters and stuff. And then if you have a 3-piece or a 4-piece, or sorry, 4-piece, it gives you a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and grab it so I can show you. I think it gives you another thing of critical, which is really good. So yeah, it'll give you another thing of critical, which is really good. It'll give you that extra damage, or critical part. The 5% extra damage against the Minor Slayer is also really good. You can do that. And then, like you said, use the Vicious Ophidian two-handed, or dual wield if you want, and then use a bow. And if you use the dual wield, you will get the 5-piece bonus as well. That's a really good combination with this. Another good combination with this is using the 5-piece oh my gosh, I forget what it's called now. Guys, sorry. But it's a 5-piece overland set that you can use. Spriggans is a really good one you can use with it. And then on top of that, Automaton is another one. So if you want to go dual wield automaton or spriggans, if you want to stick with two-handed, just stick with the agility and go with a master two-handed sword, because a master two-handed sword is going to increase the damage of your carve initial hit by 2,000. So that you see that 4,845, it gets increased by 2,000 damage. So it's really just a powerful weapon to use for this, or it's 1,500, but it's a really powerful weapon to use for this because of that one benefit. Now another one you can use is the Asylum two-handed. I recommend it if you're getting a lot of ultimate gen, but you got to remember on boss encounters, ultimate gen is really slow, so it's really not worth it. But the Master Sword works the best on this. For this, and then on the back bar, use the Maelstrom Bow, because Maelstrom applies to this and increases this thing's damage by a greater amount, and you still have a lot of high damage. The other thing you're going to want to do on the gear end now is you're going to want to change out these tri-stats for dual stat, and then switch to the dual food, this, and that way you get a much higher stamina. When you have all that stuff in the stamina, you sit about 36k stamina, so that'll give you an increased damage output as well here. If these are stamina based instead, because these will go up to almost 1,000 in stamina, so that's going to give you almost 3,000 extra stamina along with the food. And this food will, like with wearing the 511 setup, having the heavy chest and the medium legs, or the light belt and medium the rest, will put you at almost 17k health without any extra bonuses. So, really nice. And all the extra weapon damage this build gets. You get 190 or 80 something here, and then 299 here, along with Krogs. And Veladrith's works just as well, but I prefer Krogs because of the extra penetration since you don't have any. And I do prefer a Crusher enchant on an infused weapon. That's just my personal opinion. I think this build works great for it. The reason why I think it works great is because when you do a heavy attack with this, you can apply Crusher to multiple targets. And when you use Carve, you can apply it to multiple targets. It's not just one. It applies it to multiples. So that's why two-handed with Crusher works really good. Dual wield is more single target unless you're using the little hurricane spin thing that throws out weapons. But two-handed is literally built around cleaving damage. So you can apply that to multiple targets, and it makes it a lot easier for the group to have that there already. So two-handed and that actually does work better than dual wield, but it's really just up to the group and the dynamics. But this build is pretty amazing when it's played correctly with the right gear and everything. The top damage I pulled with this is 32. That's with running all that stuff that I just said. This all stamina based, the dual stat food. Weapon damage glyph also. Take out the stamina recovery, put a weapon damage glyph. You can drop the dubious camera throne for braid rabbits with spring vegetables. There is better food on live, I think. Honestly, I don't remember anymore because I've been on PTS so much lately. But you can go, you can get the CP150 food with the max health, max stamina, and that's going to be your best option. And then go with 3 weapon damage here, all this weapon damage, and in the end you end up with almost 4k weapon damage. It's like right out the door. So, and if this is Nernhone, you will be over 4k weapon damage on the main bar. On the back bar, it won't be as high. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And that's how you set this build up for vet trials. So if you guys like this build, which I hope you did, you guys can hit the like button. If you guys want to see more builds by me or just other videos by me, you can hit that subscribe button. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day. And this guy might see you again. Bye.